this evening. I'm Will Stout, Superintendent of Schools for Owen J. Roberts School District. And I do appreciate you coming out this evening, particularly on this nice evening. We were joking that probably earlier in the week with the rain, we would have had more people, but those of you that came out on a nice sunny evening, we greatly appreciate it. So I want to get started this evening just to talk a little bit about the program. For those of you that have been in the district for a while, I'm calling this version 3.0 of examining students' school start times for the district. Obviously, this is my second year as superintendent, so this is my first time through the process. I'll talk a little bit about some experiences that I've had because I did work in another district where we did engage in this process. And unfortunately, this evening, we're very fortunate to have two other school district representatives that have engaged in this process too that will share a little bit about their story, and I will introduce them a little bit later. But as far as the format goes this evening, we just want to take an opportunity to just share some information that we have, talk a little bit about the process, talk a little bit about the research regarding school start times. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that, but I will send you to resource areas that you can take a look at it. But this is an area that has been very well researched, and we'll just go over some highlights of the research this evening. But on our district website, we have everything that we have done regarding school start times. Every meeting that we have, we will be posting the information, the handouts, the minutes. So this is a process that we certainly want to be transparent in as we engage in the work. But a little bit more about the format this evening. One of the things that we're really looking to do is to get community feedback. And that's what we're looking to get this evening from you folks that are here. So what we have up here on the screen, and you can do it one of two ways with technology, and actually if you're old school, we handed you a piece of paper when you walked in as well. So you can either write down any questions that you may have on the papers that were provided when you walked in. You can do the QR code. Now I will say we are in the middle school, and students aren't allowed to have cell phones, but for this evening you're allowed to have your cell phone and you can scan the QR code if you need to. And then we also have a website. So what we'll be doing this evening is if you have questions or when you have questions, either write them down or send them in electronically. And then we have folks that are going to be looking at those questions as they come in. And if you have them written down, just put them up. They will gather those questions and they will be formulating those questions and they will be asking those questions back to the panel at the end. So that's just a little bit about the format for this evening. Okay. Next slide, please. So talking about the purpose and the history, and if you don't mind, I may move around a little bit. And as I mentioned before, this is version 3.0. This is the third time as a school district that we've looked at this. A little bit about the purpose. So we have a school start time planning committee. We had our first meeting 2 weeks ago, and we will have subsequent meetings as well. It's made up of about 50 people. We have community stakeholders. We have students involved in the process. We have teachers. We have board members. We have administrators. We have parents. So it's a pretty comprehensive stakeholder group. And we are taking a look at the school start time. So we're looking at the research and the survey findings, discussing the benefits and the challenges. And I do want to start and say there are challenges. And we are well aware of the challenges. And one of the things that I think is vitally important as we engage in this process, particularly if we decide to go down this path, is that as a district we need to provide solutions to those challenges. And I think that's vitally important. So discuss the benefits of the benefits and challenges and examine the costs and other factors. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as far as the additional costs. I did mention the folks who are on the stakeholder group, so it's up there on our website. And this presentation will be posted on our website later on this evening. And our goal is to develop a formal recommendation on school start times and present it to the greater community, and then to present it to our school board ultimately to make a final decision. So we're not going to be making a decision this evening. This is something that will require a process, but as we engage in this process, as I said at the onset, we will be transparent and we will be sharing all the work that we are doing. Next slide, please. So some of the deliverables. One of the big things that we need to develop, in my view, in my experience before, is we're going to need a comprehensive Q&A document, question and answer document, because there are going to be a lot of questions. And no matter where you do this at, some of the questions that come up, transportation and transportation costs, how are you going to handle that? How's it going to impact athletics? And then how is it going to impact my family and childcare? So no matter where you do that, those are some of the questions that come up. And I think it's incumbent upon us as a team to develop solutions for those possible barriers that are out there. So that Q&A document is going to be very crucial for us. Feedback, recommendations, so part of the committee will be making the recommendation to the school board. But I do want to share that that recommendation ultimately will come from the school superintendent. That will come from me. With a lot of input from our committee, with a lot of input from the community. But I do think it's important that as a school superintendent, that this is something that we want to engage with. I think that final recommendation needs to come to me, to our school board. And you'll hear a little bit later about some of my experiences with that. So some of the resources, and we'll guide you there again on our website, on school start times. All the resources are there, all the presentations, the surveys that we've done in the past. As a school district, we've been doing this since 2017. We've done surveys in 2017. In 2019, you'll hear from some of the other school districts this evening. I could do a survey tomorrow, and I will tell you how it would turn out. About 50-50, because that's how it always turns out. This is not a decision you're going to get consensus on. It's going to have to be a decision that we feel is in the best interest of our kids. And then we'll need to move forward from there. So we're going to have some testimonials this evening, as I mentioned, from Unionville Chadds Ford School District and from Radnor Township School District, 2 school districts in our area that have implemented this. Some videos, where we'll show a video this evening from an expert on sleep science. And we considered bringing her in. I know she did some work before, but I think the 10-minute video is everything that we need rather than a $4,000 fee to bring her in for an evening. So we opted for the 10-minute video. And then some news articles, and then I've re-emphasized this time and time again that you will have access to everything that we go through. So next slide, please. So sleep essentials, and I told you we're not going to spend a ton of time on research this evening. I think the video will outline some of that. But you'll see on the left-hand side, we do have some key information, and the research is very clear on this. As I've said before, the logistics are what typically gets in the way and are barriers that prevent this from happening in school districts. But as few as 1 in 10 teenagers in the U.S. get the recommended amount of sleep. Lack of sleep results in dramatic impact on critical brain development during adolescence, and some impacts on sleep deprivation, mood regulation disorders, decreased critical reasoning skills, declining physical and mental health. And I think we all know that we've experienced, not only in our district, but throughout the country, an increase in mental health issues with our students and diminished classroom performance. What I've included on the right is the TED Talk that we're going to show you this evening. But some of the other, what I feel are some of the key resources that I would encourage you to take a look at. Like I said, there's a plethora of information. You could spend days or weeks doing research on this. These are some areas where I think you can get a lot of bang for your buck. So the recommendation on National Sleep Foundation and the CDC, the Joint Government Commission on Sleep Deprivation in Adolescents. Just tell you a little bit about that. That was a study that was done in the state of Pennsylvania by the legislature, and it was a bipartisan study that was done. It was completed in 2019, I think either October or November, and then as we all know, the pandemic hit in February or March and everything went on hold. But it's a really comprehensive report, and not only does it contain all the research and science, but it also includes some solutions for some of the common problems that are out there. So I would highly encourage you to take a look at that bipartisan report that is out there. The CCIU Hanover report, that's from 2015, but the Chester County Intermediate Unit really engaged in research on this process and had the Hanover report do a study, and that's a local study that was done, and I think that would be a valuable resource for you to take a look at as well. And then as I mentioned, we have the Owen J. Roberts School District Start Time website where there are a lot of resources on there. And before we show the video, the only thing that I want to say regarding sleep research in addition to that is we've certainly come a long way in regard to the research, and how I commonly think about it as when you look at pro sports. You know, years ago you never heard anything really about sleep, but if you're looking at pro sports right now, you hear all these top athletes talking about the importance of getting sleep and getting their 8 hours of sleep or 9 hours of sleep. And I know as a fan, they're even taking rests and they're taking game breaks, which I know are not popular. But the science is pretty clear on the importance and the value of sleep, even in the pro athletic industry. So, Michael, at this time, we're going to show the video, the TED Talk from the sleep researcher. Wendy does a nice job of just explaining the research and the benefits of sleep and some of the misnomers or some of the myths that are out there. So why school start times? The first one's very important. So what is the ideal time for secondary students? I mean, all the research that you look at says that secondary students should be starting school at 8:30 or later. And when I say secondary, middle school, and high school students. But in 2014, I think those numbers may be getting a little bit better, but 93% of high schools and 83% of middle schools started before 8:30. So despite the research, most schools or most secondary schools are still starting before 8:30. But things are adjusting and things are changing. I think this brings us into a really good segue here. So we are very fortunate this evening to have representatives from Unionville, Chadds Ford, and from Radnor Township School Districts to talk about their journey and the process that they went through. So I have Dr. John Sandville, who's the superintendent from Unionville, Chadds Ford, Dr. Ken Batchelor, who's the superintendent from Radnor Township School District, and then Ken brought his school board president along, who insisted that she come along as well. I know Amy's passionate about this research as well, but Amy Goldman, who's the president of the school board at Radnor Township, and they also brought a couple of parents along as well. But I'm going to start with Dr. Sandville from Unionville to talk about the journey that they underwent for a later start time.
Thank you, Dr. Stout, and thanks for having me. And as Dr. Stout said earlier, I'm impressed that on a beautiful night after we've had and the sun's out after 5 days of rain, that you would come on out. So I appreciate that. In the interest of full disclosure, I am a supporter, an avid supporter of adjusting school start times for secondary students. And I will talk about our story a little bit and then turn it over to Dr. Batchelor. Which is, and I have to say this, it is ironic. Dr. Batchelor was with us in Unionville when we started this process. So he was, I told him, you don't need me, you can tell the story of both school districts. So, but that's an inside joke, but now everyone knows. So our story was unique in that we began with an initiative from students. What happened was we had a teacher at the high school did a project with the psychology class and said, if there was one thing that you could change about school to make Unionville High School better, what would it be? And so the students they broke out into groups, and you had a group of kids talking, and one kid's got a Wawa coffee, the other kid's got a Red Bull, and they are, they said to one another, we're exhausted. And the one thing that you could do to make Unionville High School better is start school later. And they did the research, and as you looked at some of the research that Dr. Stout had put up on one of those slides, that Hanover Research Group, that was a group of students from across Chester County. I'm sure there were kids from ONJ High School that were on that committee. And that Hanover group, research group, did that research for a group of students. And then they came back to school districts and did presentations. And it was really compelling. And I totally bought into the science that they were pitching. I totally bought into the fact that they were exhausted. And it's tough to look at a child who is just bleary-eyed and say, well, we're not going to listen to you. We're not going to do it because there's too many challenges. And so we undertook a process that we use a lot on difficult topics. And I'll talk about that process in a moment. But when we eliminated grade point average, when we looked at our redistricting project, any kind of big and controversial topic, we use this iterative process where We meet with the community, we put all the information out. No decisions have been made is the mantra. And we would say, hey, listen, this is the information on this topic. Give us your feedback. And so we did that, we retreated with that, we came back to the community, hey, here are three options that we can potentially go with. What are your concerns? What do you see in this? We took the information, we retreated, we adjusted the plans, and you go back and forth with that. And at the end of the day, after this process, you're talking about 18 months back and forth, in the end, we had a group of folks that we could not meet their concerns, their objections, their challenges. And we knew exactly who those people were. We knew exactly why they were opposed to the change in start times. And we had conversations with them about why we understood their position. Their position was an honest one that they were entitled to. But with all our best efforts, we could not adjust any more to meet their needs. But the 98% of everyone else, we were able to meet the challenges and meet the concerns. And so in the end, we voted, the board voted in a 7-2 vote to push start time back to 8 o'clock. Now, to be quite honest with you, that was just a modest change. It was a modest change. We had a 7:35 start. We went from 7:35 to 8. We were able to find efficiencies in our bus runs, which pushed bus pickup times back another 20 minutes. So we had kids, we were picking up kids, the earliest pickup time was 6:12. We were able to push that back to 7 o'clock. We made a commitment that we would not pick up anyone before 7 o'clock. We've stayed to that, and it made a massive difference. And so some kids had an extra 48 minutes. Some had less than that. On average, it was 35 minutes between the start time change and the bus change. And we had done a tremendous amount of research and kind of on data on the front end before we made the change, including a number of surveys of students, staff, and parents in regards to how much sleep our kids were getting. We used the Cleveland Sleep Study Questionnaire. We knew how much sleep our kids were getting. And then after we made the change, we did it again. And so classic pre-test, post-test, and here's the bottom line. Our kids slept more. What Dr. Troxel said, that kids go to, if you change start time, they'll still go to sleep at the same time. That was our experience. So our kids were getting 30 to 35 minutes more sleep on average. And we did it then. Was this a one-time thing? Did it make a difference the second year? We did the survey again the next year, same results. Additionally, we had all kinds of survey data from our staff. Are kids more alert? Are they more engaged? And the answer is yes. Made a difference from that perspective, from a teacher's perspective. And we looked at a lot of other data points, nursing visits, absenteeism, tardies, all the sort of quantitative kinds of data that we could measure and compare, all positive. Also anecdotal data that was also positive. I will tell you this, so that in the nearly 100 years that our district was in existence, we had 2 state championships. That first year that we changed school start time, we had 4. That one year. And there's all kinds of, Dr. Stout mentioned it, all kinds of data on athletic performance that's directly related to sleep time. So I'm coming up, I see on my time here, I don't want to monopolize because Dr. Batchelor can talk forever, but I got to get in more of the floor. I'll be happy to answer questions that you may have. As Dr. Stout said earlier, this is an initiative that is fraught with challenges. And if you feel that you're going to go through this process and come to consensus and everyone's going to agree, it's not going to happen. And I challenge you to be brave as you go through this process. So with that said, do I hand it to Dr. Batchelor? So Dr. Batchelor from Radnor Township School District.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. I feel a little guilty. I brought coffee to a sleep discussion. Dr. Stout, thank you for yielding to our elder and letting Dr. Samuel go first. John and I worked together for years. I was the assistant superintendent at Unionville. He was the superintendent. And when this time came to create the committee, actually, John came to me and said, Ken, I need you to lead this committee. So he stands in front of you as somebody who's a strong advocate for this. I stand in front of you as somebody who's not a strong advocate for this. I looked at John at the time and I said, John, really? I mean, is this really something that we want to look into? I was a former high school lacrosse coach. In the off season, when I wasn't coaching during the season, I'd open up the gym at 6 in the morning, 2 days a week to get the players in to work out. I've always been a morning person all my life. So my initial gut reaction to this was, really? Is this really going to make a difference? And with all the other things we have going on in the district initiatives, and he still had me lead the committee after that discussion. And while I was leading that committee, actually it was midway through, we were almost done with our work, I wound up leaving to go to Radnor as superintendent, and found out when I arrived in Radnor, I think Radnor was in a place much like you are right now. I think a very similar place. It was a topic that had been discussed for many years at Radnor. It was something that they had looked at, but we hadn't made a decision. And we had looked at it in, I think, a couple of different versions in Radnor. And we decided we needed to look at it and we needed to make a decision. And for me at the time, it was a decision on what's good for Radnor. Let's look at this and let's put this to rest. We're either going to make the change or not make the change. That was my philosophy as superintendent. That same time, the very first year, I went to my first national conference for superintendents, and I was sitting at a table with superintendents from across the nation. And I was very eager as a new superintendent, and I remember sitting at this one table, and there was one superintendent who was preparing to retire, and I asked all the superintendents, what is your legacy? Now, I'm a new superintendent. What is the thing that you have done that has made the biggest impact? And I asked that question to a lot of superintendents at that conference. And one of the first superintendents looked at me and he goes, school start time. He goes, I changed school start time. He's from California. We changed it several years ago. And he said, that is my biggest legacy. It's my first year as superintendent. We were just beginning to study at Radnor. I walked away from that conversation, and I'm really not that cocky of a person, but I walked away going, really? School start time? This is this guy's legacy? And I'm a new superintendent. I'm thinking, gosh, I hope my legacy is something greater than school start time. I wasn't a big believer. We went through the process, though, and I bought into not only the research being incredibly compelling, but watching my own children. I have 6 kids, the oldest now is 23, but watching them go through high school, talking to their friends, watching how it is true that kids have a certain time they go to bed, and it just doesn't change. That is true. So if they go to bed at 10:30 or 11, 11:30, you move school start time, there's still going to be that kid that goes to bed at 10, 10:30, 11, whatever time they go to bed. At our committee in Radnor, when we went through this process, I will tell you that when we made the change, and that change happened, I understood why that superintendent in California told me his biggest legacy, his most lasting legacy was school start time. I was amazed by how the climate and the culture at our high school changed when our kids got an extra hour of sleep. And we moved from 7:30, and I'd love to razz John about this, we moved from 7:30 to 8:30. And I'll be honest though with it, as much as I like to tease John about it, the reality is we got really lucky by a team of administrators and parents and a school board that was willing to problem solve. That process that John shared with you is a process that we followed at Radnor. It was the same process where we just kept trying to problem solve. We got to a point where we looked at the science and we said, we had a committee and we said, do we believe in the science, yes or no? And the vast majority of everybody involved said they believed in it. It was compelling. It's compelling enough to make, for us to look at how do we make a change. And then it became a huge problem-solving activity. How do we figure out transportation? And I will tell you, I think transportation is the greatest challenge. Everyone says it's sports. Sports is probably second. It's a challenge as well. But transportation was our biggest challenge. At the time when we went through this in Radnor, and also being a new superintendent, I wasn't too eager to have a change that was going to be expensive. So I was pushing really hard for something that wasn't going to cost us anything. Having lived through the change, and having lived and seen the impact that it had on our students and on our community, I would be willing to spend more money to make it happen. Because if someone came to me and said, here's something that's going to help with the mental health of your students, here's something that's going to make a difference in your kids' lives. We currently spend a lot of money doing that now every day as we look at our counseling programs, as we look at trying to adjust based on mental health. If I understood the impact this would have on the climate and culture and the lives of our students, I would have been going back through this, been more willing to look at maybe maybe there's some dollars we should be spending on this. We were able to figure out a way to do it with minimal cost. We did have to hire some extra drivers. We had to make some adjustments to our bus routes. But the lasting impact it's had for our kids has been truly incredible. I stand in front of you now a huge advocate. My kids are in Westchester School District. My youngest three, the youngest, number 4 and 5, are in high school right now. And they are giving me such a hard time about, Dad, why is it Westchester changed? What can we do to change? Because I live exactly where Dr. Troxel was sharing. It is something that I think every district needs to look at, and it is something that will have a tremendous impact on your students. Next, I will introduce Amy Goldman, our board president for Radnor, who was very involved in the process at Radnor as well.
Thank you, Ken, and good evening, everybody. I can't really speak as a school board member without anchoring my story as a parent, because I came to this issue being not unlike what Dr. Troxel had to say in her video, but I had a child in my house, and it was a battle every night, because I live by the adage of early to bed, early to rise, and I thought my children should as well, but it wasn't really that easy. And I had a teenage daughter every night, and I tried to get her into bed in high school at 9, 9:30, 10, it didn't work. And she would toss and turn and get increasingly anxious, which would make us anxious. And finally, when she fell asleep, trying to get her up and out in the morning was round 2 of this ongoing battle. So I wasn't on the school board at that point. I was just a really struggling parent trying to help my daughter get a reasonable amount of sleep so that she could be a functional human being and when she went to school, let alone perform reasonably well. So I had caught wind that another school district was hosting, not Wendy Troxel, but another woman who is an outstanding and renowned sleep expert in the field. You may have heard of her, Dr. Judith Owens. And Dr. Owens came to this school district and presented a topic called Sleep in the Adolescent Brain. And I was like, sign me up. That is the perfect talk for what I'm going through right now as a parent of a teenager. And I went to the talk, and I thought, after hearing all of the science that you heard, if you didn't know it already from Dr. Troxel, that makes sense. This makes perfect sense. I can't make her go to sleep no matter how much melatonin or guided imagery or bubble baths, whatever it is. She's not going to go to sleep. This is a matter of fighting biology. And I became at that point wholly committed to this idea of this policy change that needs to happen. Because not only are we robbing our children of vital sleep, but as Dr. Troxel said, we are cutting off their sleep cycle at perhaps the worst part of the whole sleep cycle for teenagers, when that crucial part of brain development that controls all of those behaviors that we are concerned about our children exhibiting, the brain is trying to grow out of those impulsive behaviors and create the emotional self-regulation that they need to not make as risky and impulsive decisions that lead to bad things. So I became an ardent believer in all of this, and then I landed on a school board. So lucky superintendent, I got a staunch believer in this movement on the school board. And one thing led to another. We did have some fits and starts with it in our district. And then along came Dr. Batchelor and his experience from Unionville. And I remember us sort of around the table, Dr. Batchelor, as he was interviewing, he's the one, because he knows maybe he can help make this happen in our community. And we went through, much like Dr. Sandville said, this very iterative process where we tried to get so much community involvement and feedback that I'll never forget at one of our town halls, there was still a naysayer, a skeptic, who said, I'm still not sure this is going to work, but I am really tired of hearing about it. You guys have talked about it, I sign on just so that you'll stop talking about it. And, you know, kind of funny, but by the same token, that's really important. I mean, I think O&J Roberts is doing a terrific job of making sure that they get the word out about what they're doing and engaging the community. That's really important. It was important to us as a school board. Some of our members didn't know the sleep science themselves, and if we didn't know it, we're going to have to be making a decision on it. Certainly, we didn't take for granted that the community knew about it, and beyond that, with all due respect to the O&J Roberts students, the students don't even understand their biology, and some of the resistance was coming not even so much from parents, it was coming from students who really, you think that we as adults are resistant to change. Just talk to some students sometimes. They don't want anything to mess with their schedules. So it was important also to let the students know that you're going to feel better. And as a matter of fact, once this change was made, some of the staunchest advocates for change were our students. And we actually, it was kind of funny, we really raised them to be advocates, and they went all over the tri-state area. They had been to different states. We took road trips with our students. One of them even served on the Joint State Government Commission study panel that convened, that Dr. Stout mentioned as one of the resources you might want to look at. And their stories are really compelling. They didn't realize how good they were going to feel until they got sleep. And I'm only sorry that they couldn't be with us here tonight, but we made this change in the 1920 school year. So we actually graduated the last of our students who knew the before and after this past June. Otherwise, they'd be here with us. And in full disclosure, one of them is going to college locally, and I called her and asked if she'd be willing to come. But she has a class tonight, so she couldn't make it. But I invite any of you to talk to some of our students, because they used words like life-changing. Some of our students talked about how they had been ships passing in the night with their siblings and parents, and they actually were able to have a relationship with their families in the morning that they hadn't had before. They felt better. They were more alert in first period. There was less nonsense going on in the bathrooms as kids were using some of those alternative coping strategies that Dr. Troxel referenced when you feel really tired and you have negative adaptations as opposed to constructive ways of dealing with fatigue. So the students will tell you these changes were really powerful. I'm looking at your group of students. If you haven't networked with any of the students, talk to the students. They're the ones who have experienced this. And many of them will tell you that it was life-changing. Some of them said they didn't even notice the change. And on balance, as a school board, this is an initiative now in its 4th year, and we haven't heard anything other than positive things. Are there hiccups along the way? Of course, with every initiative there's going to be a hiccup. But as a school board member, I can be on the sidelines of a soccer game, I could be at a school play, I get around to a lot of different activities in the district, and inevitably there will be a parent who comes up to me, who takes me totally by surprise, and will just say, by the way, I was a total skeptic with this initiative, and it's one of the best things that's ever happened to my family. That's, as a school board member, one of the best things, you know, in all your years in public service, and particularly over the past couple of years. It's those kinds of comments that really make it all worth it. So like Dr. Batchelor said, when he said he had run into a superintendent who said it was their lasting legacy, I believe it. Especially in a time right now when we're all super concerned about mental health of our children. This is the thing that collectively lifts them all, and as much of a believer as I was in it before the pandemic, I'm even more of a believer in this broad spread initiative now to to try to help give our students one more line of defense against the mental health concerns that we all have for them and they have for themselves. That's about it. Happy to entertain any questions. I want to also, you guys can wave. We don't have to. I brought two of the staunch parent, they were members of our Intrepid School Start Time Committee. Ms. Sarah Fox, she has 2 children in our district, and Dr. Jackie Kloss, who wears 2 hats. She's not only a parent who participated in our School Start Time Committee, but she's also a subject matter expert. So she has gone to various school districts in this community as a psychologist. She specializes in treating sleep disorders. And she has given presentations not unlike Dr. Troxel's at a lot of the school districts around here to help convey what the science is. So with that, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, John, and Ken for sharing your story. And I can certainly share my story very briefly. They did a wonderful job, but I'm someone as an administrator, assistant superintendent in another school district, and a parent who had a son go through this change in another school district that saw the value of it. And the district that I lived in prior to coming to O&J and residing in, my son goes through, was the State College School District. We were one of the first school districts in the state at the time to make that change based off of the research. And again, there were a lot of skeptics, and I get it, I understand it, but as a parent, I got to see it every day with my son proceed through schooling with an 8:40 start time. It was a game changer for him and for our family and for a lot of students. And we referenced the mental health, and which is such a big thing. So again, the science is very clear, but as I said at the beginning, where we typically get derailed are with the logistics. So it's something that is not easy to do, but my experience has been very similar to what Amy shared. Once you do the work, once you make the decision, and people adjust, then you see the benefits of it. So again, thank you. All right, so let me talk a little bit about what possible options are available for O&J Roberts School District. Let me tell you what is not available. So one of the options when we looked at this several years ago was to start all of our schools at the same time. What if we started every school at 8:30 in the morning, secondary and elementary? Well, we would have to double our busing fleet at a cost of about $4 million. So I'm going to tell you that's an option, but that is off the table. Number one, we're not going to add $4 million to our budget. Number two, there is no way we'd be able to get the bus drivers. As you know, we're struggling getting bus drivers now, as every other school district is. So that option is not on the table. So I want to spend some time talking about what is on the table. The first one that we have up here would be a flipping and staggered start time for elementary and secondary school. The one thing that I want to stress about this is, if this is something that we look to do, it is not a direct flip. I'm not interested in having elementary kids come into the schools at 7:30 in the morning and standing at bus stops at 6:45 in the morning. So if we were to look at doing a flip, our elementary students would come in earlier, and they would come in between 7:45 or 8:10. I'll talk a little bit about that later, some of those times. And then our secondary day would start at either 8:30 or 8:45. As much as the research is compelling about the adolescents needing the extra sleep and biology, any of us that have young kids know that the younger kids are up and are ready to go earlier in the morning. So the change in your circadian sleeping rhythm starts in adolescence at that middle school year, in those middle school years and high school years. So doing this flip and a staggered start time, one of the things that we've talked about is some of our 2 elementary schools on the outskirts, French Creek and West Vincent Elementary School. We may look at having them start on the front end because those bus routes are a little bit longer. So maybe we would start those schools, and again, we would run all the scenarios. Maybe those schools on the outer edge may start at 7:55 or 8 o'clock. Some of our closer schools to the main campus, North Coventry, East Vincent. We have 3. North Coventry, East Vincent, East Coventry, where I was this morning greeting elementary kids. Some of those schools, we can do those bus runs in about 35 minutes, talking with our transportation director. So we might be able to stagger them and have 2 elementary schools start a little bit earlier and our other 3 elementary schools start a little bit later. One thing that we could do would be just a flip where all of our elementary schools start at the same time, and then we have the secondary day start at 8:30 or 8:45. You know, the issue that we have there is that all of our elementary schools would have to start earlier to accommodate our farthest outreach schools that do require longer time with the bus routes. So those are 2 that we have, and then the third option that we have here would be to push everything back a little bit later. Similar to what Dr. Sandville said at Unionville that they did. So obviously an 8 or 8:15 start time is better than 7:30 in the morning. However, if you do look at the research, it is contradictory to the research. The research is very clear that students get the most benefit at the secondary level by starting at 8:30 or after. Okay? But again, those are the 3 options that our committee is looking at, that we want to continue to get input on, that we're looking at this time. But I did want to take some time and explain those 3 options. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges, and we've talked about this before, and I did include some presentations that O&J has done previously, so you can see some of the surveys that were done in the past. And as I said, you would not see much of a difference if we did a survey tomorrow. I think we would see the same type of information. Some of the costs associated with it. The one thing I do want to share with you, when we've taken a look at this, no matter what 3 options that I presented, there would be an increased cost. And running the scenarios through our transportation director, and what the increased cost would be for our non-public school runs, because we can't control their bell schedules. So the non-public school runs, we would still need to continue to transport those students by state law. So as we take a look at that, we would probably need between 5 and 6 additional bus runs for the school district. So that would be, I think, Jackie, did we say about $300,000 or so?
Correct,
Between $300,000 and $350,000. So any of those 3 offerings, we would be looking at about a $300,000 to $350,000 expense. What you will see if you take a look at some of the work that we've done previously, that's because some of our bus routes are much more efficient than they used to be. The numbers we were looking at several years ago were over $1 million and $1.7 million. And then I did mention the $4 million one if everyone started at 8:30, the entire district. So there would be costs associated with that. Some of our panelists up here did talk about some of the other implications that transportation is an issue. I think it was Ken that mentioned that, and transportation is what derails most of the efforts to try and do this. So we're really going to need to have a solid plan for our transportation. We've been meeting with our transportation director and with our provider, and we're looking at options here. Athletics, certainly that's a concern. I will say, I don't like to say there are a lot of benefits to COVID for school systems. I'm glad that we're at the point that we're at now, but I think the one thing that we've learned from COVID is that our students are very resilient. So if you're involved in an athletic event, all of our coursework right now in the Owen J. Roberts School District is available on our learning management system. So it's not like when I was in school where they said if you miss class, you miss out. Well, if you miss class, you're not there, but you have access to all your materials afterward. Again, a little bit about my story. I mentioned the school district where my son participated. He played baseball, played varsity baseball. What I can say about State College is we were on an island. So our closest away competition was an hour and 50 minutes in Harrisburg. So what I'm familiar with are athletes that had to drive an hour and 40 minutes for their closest competition, and they did not get out of school until 3:40 in the afternoon. So you do the math, sometimes they were missing 2 to 3 hours of school, but they still made it work. You know, if you're involved in athletics or extracurricular activities, you need to find a way to make it work. And like I said, you have access to your coursework. There were some things that we did and we would take a look at. I know our drives here are much shorter, but we could look at doing MiFi devices on buses so students could access their Chromebook and do work on buses back and forth. That was something that we did in my former district. So again, there are a lot of obstacles, but what I want to be focused on are what are the solutions to these obstacles, and that's what part of our committee is what we're looking to do is find those solutions. So next slide, please, Michael. Just a little bit of a timeline here, and I think John mentioned that they took 18 months. I look at it, we started this effort at O&J in 2017. We've already been working on it for 5 years. So we're not looking at doing an 18-month process. This is the process that we're looking at because we have all the research. We've done the previous surveys. We have our committee in place. So this is the process that we're looking at. We've already met with our planning team. We have our community forum tonight. We're going to have at least one other meeting with our planning team. I would like to take a proposal to our board sometime in November. We would look then to get our board to vote on it either in November or possibly in December if we would need a little bit more time. But much like I think it was Dr. Batchelor said, I want to do this work, I want to make a recommendation, and I want to put it to bed. We're either going to do it or we're not going to do it. But we're not going to be looking at it 3 years from now or 5 years from now. I think if we're going to make that commitment, I think we need to make that commitment and do it. So really that is our timetable for taking it to our board and getting a decision. And for 2 reasons. Number one, we've been looking at it for a long time. And secondly, if this is something that we're going to do, I want to be fair to our families and I want to give them time to plan accordingly. And if this is something that we would get approved in November or December, then our school and our families would have 8 or 9 months to prepare for any changes that we would make. Next slide, please. So just a final thought, and then we will take your questions. I know we've been formulating them throughout the night. So our recommendation to adjust school start times is not a decision that should be instinctively based on popularity or change of degree or the degree of difficulty to implement the change. I was just out today, I mentioned earlier, I've been out some elementary schools talking about leadership. I talk with second graders about, one important quality about being a leader is sometimes you make decisions that may not be the most popular, but are in the best interest of your constituents. And in this case, my constituents are students. So I really believe in that I want to do what's best for our kids in our school district. So our recommendation must consider our shared responsibility to implement change that represents and supports the best interest of OJR students. So with that, that's the information that we have for you. And I do know that we've had some questions that were generated online, and I think we may have had questions that were generated tonight. So Michael, I will give you a mic for our questions. And I would say while we're making this transition, I again want to thank our representatives from the other school districts, because not only did they agree to come and talk about their story, their journey, but they've also agreed to stay and answer questions with us this evening.
What bus pickup times would we potentially looking at for elementary, middle, and high school?
Good question. I forget who said that they had some pickup times at like 6:08 in the morning. Right now, our earliest secondary pickup time is at 6 a.m. in the morning. So right now, that's what we're picking up. When we run these scenarios that we're looking at right now, particularly on the flip, if we would flip elementary and secondary, the earliest we would need to pick up students would be 7 a.m. So we would move that back an hour. We do have all the research. That would impact 5 days where pickup is before sunrise in the morning, or not sunrise, before dawn. There's 5 days before we turn the clocks back that it would be impacted. The rest of the time, that 7 a.m. pickup would be the time where there would be dawn, so we wouldn't have students standing out in the dark for a lengthy amount of time. And I think that's a concern for secondary students, but I know even more so with younger kids standing out that early. Michael, did I answer that whole question?
Has there been any consideration given to students holding after-school jobs or families who rely on that income?
Yeah, I think that's obviously one of the things that we need to take a look at. And again, I can hand this over. Our panelists here really want to answer that question as well. From my experience, when I was an administrator in another school district, the employers adjusted and our students were still able to keep their jobs, and actually were probably more alert doing their work because they were getting extra sleep. So let me turn that over.
And that's a question that we had when we went through our process. So we talked to our students, we asked them, well, where do you work? And we contacted every one of those employers and had conversations with them. And they said, no problem, we'll take the kids when, you know, what happens, and let's be realistic, and this is true of a lot of the objections, the big mover in the community is the school district, right? Where parents are, you're the center, you're the hub of the community, and the community adjusts around changes that you make. People make adjustments now when you change bus times. They know, you guys figure out, oh, the buses are on the roads, we don't want to be there during that time frame. We'll do a different route, we'll start a little earlier, we'll start a little later. And that's what we found with students and their jobs. The employers had absolutely no issue with the change in start time on our end. I don't know if Ken, if you had a similar experience.
The same piece, and there was all these different pieces that we kept looking at, I think, with the questions. And one thing I do want to emphasize that we didn't share is that as we were going through this process, I realized at Unionville, and I realized at Radnor, our current system, our current schedule wasn't perfect. There was a lot of problems with our current schedule and the start time. Because we just always did it, we didn't spend the time to look at what didn't work with it. It wasn't perfect. And with this process, you have to be careful that you don't let that become, perfection be the enemy of good. Because there's a lot of problems with what the current schedule is, and what you create are going to have challenges as well. There will be challenges with what you create and how you adjust.
Michael?
How would you accommodate students who attend TCHS?
Sure, we've had conversations already, and I see our high school principal, Mr. Kohler, is here with us tonight. We've already had conversations with TCHS to see how we could work out the schedule. I don't want to go into too much detail about that, but I know with TCHS we would be able to work out the schedule with our students. TCHS is Technical College High School. It's the former VOTEC or CTC, or I don't know what we're, VOTEC, probably back in my day. So now it's CTC or Technical College High School is what we call it here. So.
Have we thought about how many parents may rely on their older children getting home before the younger ones to take care of them, or until their parents come home?
Yeah, obviously that's a big concern no matter where you do it. So that's something we would need to take a look at. As I look at this again conceptually, what we may be doing is, right now some parents may rely on their, I'll say, high school age students taking care of the younger students in the afternoon. While it may just be flipping it around a little bit, particularly if we would take a look at the flip. And in that case, the elementary kids would be going earlier in the morning, so those secondary students would be there to provide the service earlier in the morning for those students. So it would be just taking a problem that parents typically have and just reversing it. So a lot of times parents now are having problems on the front end of the day. They would have a secondary student there to help out on the front end, and we just have to make arrangements for the afternoon. And we would have to take a look at increasing our capability and our capacity for after-school programs for kids where that might be a problem. So I don't know, John or Ken, if you have anything you want to add about that. Or...
Well, we didn't do a flip, we did a push. But as Dr. Batchelor said, there's issues when you make changes, right? And the system you have in place right now is not perfect. And we had, for us, we looked into the challenges that quite honestly, for staff was the bigger challenge around, child care for our staff who might be, we have teachers that work in our district, but their kids go to school in other districts. And so we worked with our staff in terms of accommodations from them and how we do after school, or how we do staff meetings to let them take care of the kids. So I think that any system that you have in place, that it's not going to be perfect, and it's the challenges are just in a different place.
We have a couple that are similar, so I'll try to combine them into one. There are some questions about which bus runs would start sooner, and some questions if the schools that are further out should start at later times, if it makes sense to have those outlying schools start later and the closer schools start earlier. If there's been any consideration of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm getting that, Michael.
So we talked about Western Vincent and French being the outlying
Correct.
schools. Has there been any thought given to having them be the later
Yeah,
elementary schools?
I mean, that's something we can take a look at. You know, our thinking was, those are the schools on the outskirts, and they have longer runs. So if we were to look at the flip model, so those schools have the longer run, so they would be picking students up on the outskirts of our district, and it's a longer run to bring them onto our campus for secondary school. So that's why we were initially looking at having those outer elementary schools start earlier, so that we can get our secondary students on the campus earlier.
Are we looking at more bus efficiencies at this time?
Yes, we are. I don't have much detail, but I know we've engaged, and Jackie, I don't know if you want to add anything there. I know we've engaged in new software that we're using with our transportation company to look at having greater efficiency. And I referenced it earlier, when we looked at this information several years ago, there were some figures that were higher because we were not running as efficiently with our buses as we are now. So that's why some of the costs, if you compare the numbers I said earlier with what we did in some previous studies, is because we have some more efficient bus runs. But we are also exploring engaging with other contractors possibly for some of our athletic runs, for some of our other runs, because like I said, we are in the same predicament. I know Dr. Sandals here, we were just talking about this yesterday. We're in the same predicament as every other district is when it comes to transportation. So we are exploring other options with other vendors to try and assist us, not only with our athletics, but with our field trips and any other types of trips that we run during the school day.
What would school dismissal times be?
So the school dismissal times, I had that up a little bit earlier. I believe we would be looking at either an 8:30 or 8:40 at the secondary level. We'd be looking at a 3:30 or 3:40 dismissal, and then at the elementary. Oh, we don't have the dismissal times right there, do we? Okay, so I have that worked out. So the elementary depends on when we start. They have a 6-hour and 40-minute day. The secondary day is 6 hours and 45 minutes. So if we're taking a look at the math here, because I've run so many different scenarios. So let's just pick 8 o'clock for elementary. If we were to do the flip, then elementary would end at 2:40. So that's when elementary would be ending. And again, if we did the staggered flip, it would depend on what elementary school that you're at and when you start. So if you're at an elementary school that starts at 3:10, then you would be ending at 2:50. If you were at one that starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, then you'd be ending at what I just said before, 2:40.
Will making a change increase the busing issues, such as delays?
My answer to that is I don't know. It's a problem that we currently have in our current system, as some of these folks have talked about earlier. So it's a problem we're trying to troubleshoot now in our current schedule. So whether we're running this schedule again next year or whether we're running a new schedule, we're going to have to troubleshoot this issue and try and resolve it. If I had an answer for you, I think I'd be on the circuit making a ton of money because all 501 school districts are dealing with the same issue right now with transportation.
Has the district already made a decision on this, or is it still up for debate and consideration?
It's still up for debate and consideration. Again, this is part of the process and the timeline that I shared with you. As I shared earlier too, as a superintendent, as part of the committee work, I would be making a recommendation to our board, but nothing would be official until our school board took action on it.
Is this goal setting up our kids for real-life success?
Well, I think Dr. Troxel talked about that a little bit earlier. So it's really, we're talking about biology here and we're talking about science. And at this stage in their life, when they're in adolescence, that's just the way that their circadian rhythm is set up, and that's the way their sleep patterns are set up. So I can tell you, and many of you know, I'm a guy that grew up in Boyertown. If I would have had this discussion with my dad 30 years ago, he would have told me just to get up early. But as I've said earlier, we've evolved, and there's science out and there's research here that really supports this. So, what was that question again? Because I know I just went off on a tangent.
Basically, has the school district already made a decision?
No.
Has any consideration been given to working parents who may have not a lot of flexibility with their schedules?
Yeah, and that's something we're going to have to take a look at. It's a major concern that comes up because we have 2 districts here that have, made some changes already. As I shared with you earlier, my former district that I worked in, we made this change, and we actually did the flip model. And people adjust accordingly, provided that they have enough time to prepare, and provided that as a school district we're working in partnership and trying to provide solutions to the problems that are out there.
We had a community member who was looking at some of the survey responses and was wondering if there was any light that we could shed as to why there seems to be some hesitation, perceived hesitation from staff and on this.
Yeah, I think that's an easy one for me. Change is tough. I think anytime you're looking at changing something, initially there's some resistance to it. Ken shared his story. He wasn't really buying it at first, and not sure how much I was at one point. But when you live it and you see it, and you see the impacts that it has on kids, I'm not a good poker player. I'm a firm believer in this because I've seen it, and I've seen what it does, and I see how it benefits kids. So, Michael, get back to your question again, because I do go off on tangents. I apologize.
Talking about hesitation from teachers,
Yeah.
and they also did ask if there was any difference between elementary and secondary teachers on the subject.
Yeah, so as far as the teachers go, our teachers would be working the same number of hours, so it may look a little bit different, but we're not looking to add to their workday or anything like that. But I do understand the trepidation because, folks are used to their schedule. They've been in that schedule, at least in OJ, their entire career. But I think I said at the end, in fact, I know I said at the end of this presentation, I think we need to make decisions that are in the best interest of kids. And as adults in a school community, we will adjust accordingly if that's the direction that we choose to go.
Are we considering doing another round of surveys?
Yeah, we've talked about this, and to be honest, I'm not. And I know in talking with Ken here at Radnor, they did not do a survey. We've done surveys. We've included them there. They tend to be about 50-50. So we're not looking to do another survey. We're looking at the science. We're looking at the research that will help guide our recommendation. Ken, I know you and I have talked about it.
Yeah, I'm always, some of my board members give me a hard time over my lack of interest in surveys sometimes. I really genuinely want community parent feedback and staff feedback on items, but I'm very hesitant to do a survey that looks like a referendum question, because you do a survey, you favor this or not, and then you get the results. I remember in Westchester, they did a survey, do you want to keep spring break or not? This was like 10 years ago. And 58% of people said, please keep spring break. And then Westchester turned around and said, you know what, we're going to shorten spring break. And I was like, oh, why didn't you survey? Why did if you always plan to shorten it? So I think you have to be careful about when you do surveys and what is it the feedback you're looking for. So at Radnor, we didn't do a survey. Instead, we did a lot of community forums like this to get feedback and try to answer the questions, put Q&As up on websites to try to get that feedback. The only time I questioned whether or not we should have done a survey was when Tredyffrin Easttown School District, after we made the switch, a year later, they started looking through the switch, and the superintendent, I'm going to survey the parents. And he called me, and he goes, 3/4 of my parents want to switch. We're going to move. And I was like, oh, well, that makes it a little easier, I guess. But I do think that when it comes down to issues, it comes down to you need to look at what is best for the kids and what is best for your school district and what can you do.
To further, I think to further that, although we're not looking at doing a survey right now, we want to get input from parents. I mean, we're having this forum tonight, and we want to hear from folks if there are things we can do if we end up making the change, that we can do to help families. So it is important to know what people are experiencing, the questions they have, and that's why we want to give you these forums and allow people to reach out to us.
We have a couple of comments from families where their teenagers are responsible for watching the younger children beforehand, and there are some concerns there about whether they will see the benefit of this program. Has any consideration been given to, just with working parents, whether some of these teenagers are also taking care of family members?
Yeah, and obviously that's a concern. We know that's one that comes up. As I said a little bit earlier, and again, how I conceptualize it is that you may be looking at, there's typically a child care need, whether it's in the afternoon or the morning, and this would just be taking the need to the afternoon, because you would have a secondary student who would be there in the morning to get the child on the bus. If we would do a flip, that would get the child on the bus in the morning, so then you would have to, as a school district, we would have to put our resources to provide support in the afternoon for child care for families that would need it.
Is there the possibility that neighboring school districts might adjust their sport and school start times?
Yeah, there's always that possibility. I think pre-pandemic, that joint commission report that I mentioned earlier, I think there was a real push for that. I think the pandemic, though, really halted a lot of school districts in their efforts. So I think this is a trend that's coming around. Not that I would want to be California. If you've seen California, they've done a state mandate that requires all schools to do it. I don't think Pennsylvania was heading down that route, but I do think there was a real emphasis in our state to do this. And I think as we get more and more districts that move in this direction, I think there'll be more pressure to follow the research and the science and do this. It would be much easier if all the school districts were looking at this and engaging in this and would make the change. Because that would help with the athletic question that you commonly get as well.
What about working parents who need to revamp their daycare schedules? Has there been any consideration to working with local daycare providers?
Yeah, so we're at the early stages. I know, and looking at Mrs. Crumrine down there, we had a conversation the other day, and I know she was going to be reaching out to the daycare providers regarding options and availability, and to let them know at least what we're looking at. So again, we're kind of a tough stage right now because we haven't made a decision yet. But we are trying to do the research and get the information in case this is the direction that we do. But we do want to be careful. We don't want to go out and make all these plans if in the end we decide not to make a change. And sometime in December when we make this recommendation. So, but these are conversations that we are having. Yes.
Has there been any consideration given to incorporating online learning for students who may want to start earlier and still end earlier?
Yeah, when I mentioned earlier about the pandemic, one thing about our district too is we have many more online options available to students than we did when we were looking at this issue years ago. So I'm thinking about some of the students that may be involved in athletics and may be concerned with missing class time. Well, they certainly could register for an online course. An asynchronous course would give them the opportunity to work at that course at any time. Similarly, again, from my previous experience, we encouraged athletes and people who were going to missing class time to engage in conversation with their guidance counselors and look at their schedules to try and schedule study halls possibly at the end of the day or some other courses. You wouldn't want to schedule an AP course at the end of the day if you know you're playing baseball and you're going to be missing it several times. So I think in working with our counselors on the schedule, with the plethora of online courses that we have available to students, things are just different as far as availability to coursework than it was several years ago.
What is the precedent of this flipping as opposed to, say, other school districts that just pushed back?
Yeah, the precedent, some school districts are doing it this way. One of the concerns, if the later you move the elementary start time, is that those kids then are getting it done later. So if we were to do something where we're starting our secondary day at, let's just say, 8:15, well, right now, the way things are set up, our bus runs, because all of our buses in secondary meet here on this campus, it takes an hour between our bus runs. So if we're starting our secondary day at 8:15, then we're not starting our our elementary day until 9:15, so then that's pushing that time later in the day. And again, we're talking sleep research. The elementary students are fine starting earlier in the morning and then ending their day earlier.
Does a traffic study need to be done for routes 100 and 23 if the time shift?
So I'm going to defer this to Mrs. Crumrine because that is something that we're currently doing, so I'll let her talk about that.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Sal. We're actually in the process of doing a traffic study right now. So we did engage with McMahon Associates, and they are looping in the delayed start impact to the traffic study and doing the counts of traffic and how changing school start times will impact our traffic flows.
Oh,
I'll tell you what, I lost sleep over the traffic around Radnor High School the week before this started. If you've ever been to Radnor High School, Penn Medicine built a new building, of course, right at the same time as we were doing this. A new Penn Medicine facility was opening up literally across the street from our high school. We're very close to the exit to the Blue Route right by our high school. And I had visions of gridlock because 7:30 traffic pattern was one thing around Radnor High School, and now we're moving into 8:30. What we realized was that the traffic pattern, August or early September when school starts, as Dr. Sambo, John said earlier, parents all of a sudden realize, oh my gosh, school's in session. I need to now adjust my time on my commute. And that's the same thing we saw. We didn't see all of a sudden massive gridlock. We saw the same reality though that we see every year pre the switch and then after the switch. For the first 2 weeks that school's open, there's traffic. People have to get used to the fact school's back open. Bus routes, buses are on the streets, buses are doing bus stop. After about the second or third week, it all kind of levels out. But that was my biggest nightmare, was traffic, and it turned out not to be an issue for us. And we had traffic studies done, tried to predict it and all of that as well. And it was a much more, I think, congested area. My little knowledge of the area was much more congested area, and it turned out not to be a fear.
thank you.
Will student athletes and those engaged in activities lose more classroom time to accommodate this change? Do we have an estimate on how much?
Yeah, we don't have an estimate right now. Our current predicament, they're losing a lot of time because we're sending students very early, sometimes several hours earlier than their athletic contest because of the shortage of busing and needing to get buses back here on campus. So right now, our students are losing a lot of time. So it's something that we're looking at. Whether we change our school start times or we continue what we're doing right now, it's a problem. So we need to address it, and we're looking at ways to address it. So the answer to that is I'm not sure if they would lose more time, but they're already losing a lot of time. Okay? Well, I think Michael will give me the sign that that's the last question, but no? Oh, sorry. Oh.
One thing, something we wound up doing is we created a phys ed class for athletes at the end of the day. It was a real challenge, high school and scheduling, and it was a real headache to hand schedule. But we put a phys ed class in the afternoon so kids were then missing out on their phys ed class when they had the early dismissal. You also, when you look at sports, you all of a sudden start to realize football is not the problem, wrestling is not the problem, basketball is not the problem. Your problem in sports with dismissals are golf, tennis. You start to see which sports there are, and so which kids do you have to try to move sort of like. We've taken another step, which I'll mention. We actually went from trying to put fitness for athletes to have discussion about why are our athletes involved in physical education classes, and we've now made another change that we only have a physical education requirement freshman year, and then it's all electives for our high school students after that, all of our students. And that gives our students a little bit more freedom within their schedule to pick and choose to try to schedule some free periods if they need it at the end of the day. So it's opened up a whole other discussions for us about what do our kids need to be doing during the day, especially our kids who are so involved in athletics and other activities as well.
Michael, one more question?
Where is the cyber option? Those that need sleep can be accommodated. Cyber for the first class, not, I'm guessing it's not just the athletes that have to leave, so we're looking for cyber option for all?
Yeah, and we do have cyber options for all students. So we run a number of courses that are self-developed here at Owen J. Roberts, run by our teachers, but for classes that we don't offer here, those are available through Chester County Intermediate Unit through the BPA program. So online courses are already available for our students, not just athletes, all students. All right. Well, I thank you so much for coming out and engaging with us this evening on this topic. And again, if you have questions and you want to reach out to me directly, please feel free to do so, but I appreciate you being here tonight, so thank you.